Welcome to Acreate, the channel for anyone who likes to learn more about game development. In this tutorial we will make a Pong looker game together. We will do this by starting from top to bottom, which means we start by creating the movements of the player, adding collisions, then we create a score counter, and at last we add a smart AI. Without further ado, let's start to make a game. Click on New, click on Drag and Drop. This will open a new screen in your browser to save the project. Click on Save and Continue. So now we can start to make the sprite. Click on the sprite map, create a sprite. A sprite is literally just an image on the screen. Sprite player. We will also change the size. Normally I will just use the scale image because it always will have the same width and height, but in this case I just, for the paddle, I will just use the setting 32 to 128. Click on apply, edit image, we click on the bucket tool, make it white, and we already have the paddle. Now that we have the image of the paddle, we want to create the object. So go to the folder objects, right mouse button, and click on create an object. We will assign the sprite that we made on this object. Give it the sprite player, rename it. And will we add the event key down? We will use the W8 key, so we are going to use the W. And we want to use set speed. I use it very often. Just search it in the toolbox or find it under movement, set speed. And we want to change the vertical direction with a speed of -4, because in gamemaker when you go up you will have like less of the eye, so it will count up and down. And we want to duplicate this event and give it another key press. Let's say the letters S. It will give an error, but just save it. It's just like it's reloading. And we will change the vertical speed to 4, as well as making the function that if there is no key down, then just set the speed on 0, the vertical one. You can easily just duplicate it by clicking on it, Ctrl D, duplicate, and it will create a new object player. Player 2, double click on it, otherwise you are still in player 1. I like it that it's already called player 2. Now we can just change the event by going up and down. So W is key down up, and S is change event key down down. Great job, you already created the movement of both players, but now we are going to add the ball. I just opened a new screen to create a sprite. So we are going to give the ball an image, and I'm going to scale the image to 32 to 32 to make a simple ball. We will use the ellipse tool to make a ball. So hold down the shift to make an exact great ball. Now we also need to be aware to use collision mask. So for the ellipse it's very easy. There is automatically ellipse, which is a bit slower, but it's fine. And we also will change it on the player. So on the player we also give the collision mask. So at this moment both of them have a collision. We will also create a new sprite, and we will call it wall, which we will just give a simple color. We are not going to see it in the game. And we must not forget to give it a collision mask. Collision mask basically creates a trigger object over the sprite, because the sprite itself doesn't have any function, but with a collision you just create an area that gamemaker Studio uses to calculate it when two instances are in a collision or in a trigger with each other. Let's continue by adding the ball, as that is the most important object that we have in the game. Create an object by right mouse button clicking on the object and create an object. And rename it OBJ ball. Give it the ball sprite by clicking on the sprites folder, sprite ball, and add events, create Search for the direction set random. Don't take the fix, but click on the set direction random and click on all of the four corners. Give it its speed. Toolbox, type in speed. And we want to make the balls faster than the pads and click on speed 6. Now we said that the ball will choose a random direction in the field when it starts its start position again, and we'll set the speed 6, which is 2 more than the pads. We now want to make the ball speed up when it hits one of the players and also reverse its direction. All that said, we just make a collision with the object player and going to reverse direction horizontal, and we will set the speed on +1 and relative because we want it to count it up. And as we want to copy this exact behavior with the other player, we just duplicate the event, take the collision from the other object player, and we'll ignore the error warning. It doesn't really matter, just save, and we will already have the other collision as well for the other player. Also don't want the ball to flew out of the room, so we create a new object with the sprite wall and just call it object wall. Go back to the object ball and click on collision object wall reverse, in this way the vertical direction of the ball. Now we can check it by just opening the first room that is already the preset in GameMaker. If you don't see the room editor, just go to room and click on reset Windows on current desktop. In this way you have the room editor with the layers, with the instance properties and the properties of the room. The standard setting of the room is 1366 and 768, which I will just use. You can hold the middle mouse button to change your view, to drag the view, and also the control to zoom in and zoom out. Before I'm going to drag the objects in the scene, I want to make you aware to always have the layers on the instance when you want to drag objects in the scene. So I want to drag the object ball in the middle of the center, and I want to drag object player 1 and object player 2 in the scene. And I do notice that player 2 has a bit of a difficulty to be exactly in the screen, so I'm just unchecking the snap in that case because that is because of the snap function, and then I just drag it in the scene. And now we want to add the wall object, but we don't want to have the object in the scene, so I'm just dragging it outside of the scene. You can see where the scene is. It's like because of the snap grid, you can see all the blocks, and so I'm just going to add the wall on the sides, and that makes that the ball still collides with it, but we are not seeing it on the screen. This also reminds me to add in the object player the event collision object wall to add a stop of the speed when it hits the wall. And just copy this event and place it also in player 2. To make the collision working, you need to also select solid on the wall objects to make it a solid object. You can now check your game by pressing the F5 button on your keyboard or pressing the little button run next to the debug mode. And in this case, the ball should just bounce off the walls and off the pads and go faster when the pads hit the ball. As you most likely notice at this moment, the function of the ball are just basically on the screen. If it's outside of the screen, the ball is gone. So we want to capture the ball and count the score of the players. Before adding the score, I just close the room editor and we'll make up a new font. Click on font, create new font. The standard font is Arial, so I'm just going to pick something at random, which has a bit of a feel. Let me cut me out 3 and make the size 48. At this moment you can delete the ABCD and all those letters to save up the data. But as I'm also going to use it as the font of our main screen, I'm just going to keep it. And don't forget to regenerate the font, otherwise it's still not in the game. And we will make a new object. In this case, we will create an object without a sprite. Give it a name to easily remember it, object controller. And assign in the create event of the object, so when the object is going to be spawned, the variable score1, set it on 0, and a variable called score2. And now we want to create the UI. So draw a UI. So at this moment, the sprite will draw on the screen. Scroll to the draw fonts elements and set fonts. Click on the folder fonts. Select the font that you just created. Give it the color white in this case because our screen is black. We drag the draw value on the screen, delete the preset caption, we add the score. When you just type in score, it will automatically register all the scores that and the variables that is in the system. So it already knows there is a score 1. We want to have it kind of like in the middle of the screen, so we use a code for this, room width divided by 2, and as then it will be immediately set on the middle, so we want to have it a bit to the left because otherwise it is still not in the middle, and I guess that it was kind of close to -55. You can tweak this number by yourself and add in the same way the value score 2. I just wanted to keep the column to keep a bit of distance between the scores and draw score 2 in this case. And we really want this one to be drawn on the middle of the screen. So room width divided by 2 and the I value 120. Now we can just create the two goals. I'm not going to remake a new sprite for it, but you can in this case, as I'm just going to use the same sprite that the wall has. I'm just only going to change the name to object goal 1 because I'm going to give it all the functions in the ball, and I will just duplicate this one and making the object goal 2. Double click on the ball to create the collisions. So add the event, create your collision goal 1, which I didn't really name 1, but 17, I just know this is goal number 1. This reminds us to really notice what you call your objects, so I also make sometimes mistakes in it. Okay, so just set the variable to score 2, and in this case we need to be aware that this moment we call the score 2 from the ball, so the game will give an error. So be aware to click on the object controller to assign the score to the object controller and add the value +1. This makes that when player 2 shoot to the goal of player 1, it will add 1 score on the score 2. So we also want to get the ball back to its start position, so jump to start. Just in the toolbars can just say jump, just type in start and we already get it in the movement, jump to start. And we duplicate everything in this event to create the goal of player 1 in this case. Ignore the error, it will always come if you just duplicate events. The GameMaker doesn't really like it. And just change the score to score number 1 and be aware indeed to have it clicked on the relative so it counts up. Now we can just create in the room the two goals. Be aware with your names because at this moment I didn't use a different color for the goals, so it can be a bit confusing, but as I really know that this is goal number 1 for player 2, this is the goal, and the object goal 2 for player 1, I'm just dragging it here. And you can just test it by playing it if it's correct, and otherwise just switch it to the other side. It shouldn't be that difficult to find out. At this moment I tested it and I realized that the ball is like flying over the screen when it hits the goals. So I'm just also going to change back the speed of the ball when it hits a goal. So it starts again on the speed of 6. So set speed, direction 6. And do that also for goal 1. Just set speed, direction to 6. This should stop this problem. And don't forget to drag in the object controller to be able to see the score in the screen. At this moment the game goes on and on and on. I'm not going to make a very extreme high score and end screen and whatsoever, but at least I want the player to give them the chance to try it again. I'm going to add the event step, so it's going to control it at any time in the object controller. Not clicking on if variable, but if expression. We want to use an expression to double check if score either 1 is 10 or score. And then we use those kind of long strokes to say to gamemaker check another statement as well. Score 2 equals 10. So if this expression is correct, we want to set the variable, the two variables of the score. So score 1 to 0 and score 2 to 0 as well. Sometimes we have friends around to play our game, but well, not always. And it is still nice to give the player the chance to play the game without another player around. To make that possible, we need to create a new room as the main room to make the setting. Just click new room, but be aware room 1 is still your first room. So hover over the room and then you see a small icon to change the order of the room. So this time I'm going to drag on room 2 to the first, and as you see the little house has been also ordered that this is now the main room, which means that this room comes first. To start, I want to drag in the object controller already in this room and click on room 1 and delete the object controller. And be aware to click on the object controller and tell gamemaker that this object is persistent. Persistence means that the object will never delete itself. So other objects are just placed in the room, and if you go to another room, they will be deleted, but the persistent object will also go with the player to the other room. In the object controller, I want to create a new variable, the variable that I will call player amount, to count how many players will be on the game. This will be easier to make the UI draw something new based on the status of the player amount. So I'm just going to check if variable player amount is 0. Player amount. Going back to the draw, set font. Set font, we already know which fonts, the font that we just created by ourselves. Set a color to white and say draw transformed value. So the caption, and this time I'm just going to type in Pong. So it will be just on the screen the name of the game. We use the same trick as before, just by using the room width divided by 2 minus 400, and using the I value again to 20 and rescale it to be 4 times as big. At this moment we still have that the object controller draws the scores, so I don't want that. I just want again to check the variable variable here, if variable value player amount greater than 0, then we will set the font, the draw color to white, and the draw the value. You need to drag it in the block that we just created. So if you create an if statement, drag it in the block. Okay, this is already settled. We just want to have 2 buttons to press to click for single player or for multiplayer. Just create new sprites for this. We can just rescale the button by resize canvas to a side that we like, but it doesn't really matter that much because we can still rescale it on the screen. Just added the image. I like to use the rectangle tool outline to create a kind of outline for a button. Something like this. Add a new layer if you like to test some different kind of fonts, because there are so many fonts in GameMaker and it is kind of a hard time to check them all. So I think I'm just going with Cut Me Out 3. I'm just typing in, I'm just clicking again, single player, and just hope it looks okay. Just rename it now to a better name, like Sprite button single player, button single player, and make the same kind of button for multiplayer. Or import your own buttons. If you created both buttons, just go to Object, create both new buttons, like Object, button, single, Sprite, button, single, and at the event, mouse press down, left press, and go to room, next room, and change the score. So set the variable player amount to 2 and assign the object controller to take the player amount from the object controller. Duplicate this button by clicking on it, Ctrl D, and double click on the button to make the button multiplayer. Assign the multiplayer button on the sprite and change the variable on the player amounts to variable 1. Now we have everything settled to check in the object player if we want to play a multiplayer or a single player game. We do this by creating a new step event to check the variable on the object controller. So if dragging the variable, click on the object controller and check the player amounts of the game, and that must be greater than 1. Now we'll find the function jump to position, and we are going to set the x to relative and the I value to the object ball value. Object ball point I, which makes the computer invulnerable. To make it still fun to play, we need to give a delay to the AI. So we set back the variable to 1, player amount and value 1, and we will add a set alarm, and this alarm will make the delay. So how longer you make the delay, how easy the AI gets to be played with. I changed it to 20 and add the event alarm to set the player amount back to 2. So assign a variable player amount 2, and be aware again to say object controller. Double check in your step event if you assign the variable to the object controller. Now we have everything to have the game working. So we go back to room 2, which we didn't rename, so just be aware, and drag in the object button multiplayer and the object button single player. And I like to make them a little bit bigger. Congratulations, now you finished the game. Press F5 to check if everything is working. Hope you had fun by making this game together. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you will miss none of my tutorials or reviews.